Right, so it's Mr. Dosser back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about something slightly different. It's the Toyota Prius and why I think it's one of the most important cars of the last 20 years. Before we get into it, could you please like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you think and what you want to see next, and let's get into it. So, contrary to popular opinion, Toyota didn't actually create the hybrid vehicle concept. Vehicles with both an internal combustion engine and electric motors existed as far back as 1898, but Toyota were the first manufacturer to almost mass produce a hybrid car and to overcome all the quibbles, all the annoying things, that impractical issues surrounding hybrid powertrain. So in 1997, the first gen Prius came out, and I'll be quite honest, I'll be quite frank, it wasn't much of a looker. It was quite a bland car, and it really just served one purpose only, and that was to be more economical than its counterparts. Now, the whole idea, the primary reason, was to increase the longevity of the high voltage battery to match that of the rest of the car's components, and that's what Toyota had done. The system was fronted by a 4-cylinder 1.5 litre NZ or NZ, if you want to call it that, series engine, which ran a simulated Atkinson combustion cycle for optimal fuel efficiency. I'll probably put up a diagram about here showing the Atkinson combustion cycle. Anyway, that was allied to a compact and high-torque electric drive motor and a separate generator. The final component was a powerful nickel metal hydride battery pack hidden behind the back seat. This all sounds very complicated. I'll probably put up a picture, screen to show roughly how the hybrid system works. It did show you in the car, which was quite a clever thing. And the way Toyota do things, they put a lot of research, a lot of development into these things. And the reason why they did so was because they saw in 1997, the early 90s, that you had oil crisis, you had problems with fuel, and they realised we need to find an alternative energy source, fuel source for cars to get from A to B. And there wasn't really much of an alternative at the time. Mercedes, Audi, BMW, the big boys, they didn't really have much. And they realised at the time that their sales were starting to dip in Europe, and especially with the likes of Ford and Vauxhall, they started producing more reliable run-of-the-mill cars, hatchbacks. So Toyota realised they needed to produce something to get people on board, and to be the only manufacturer out there to produce a hybrid powertrain, it was automatically the go-to. If you wanted a hybrid powertrain, you had to get a Toyota and you had to get a Prius. Interestingly, Toyota built such a good powertrain that the principles and basic architecture of the first gen Toyota Prius is still used to this day, and you'll find a plethora of Priuses with 200 to 300,000 miles with no problems at all. And that foundation went on to forthcoming models such as the Corolla, the Celica, the Celica, the RAV4, and we're up to the 4th generation of Prius now. Sales in Japan were extremely strong from the outset, and that really was helped by it winning Japan's Car of the Year in 1998. They started selling a lot of units, and with the hybrid system they managed to get a theoretical driving range of 560 miles in the first generation Prius, and combined with 57.6 mpg, the power plant produced roughly 114 grams per kilometre CO2, which by today's standard doesn't sound amazingly good, but back then you have to realise most things were producing something beginning with a 2 and not a 1, even your run-of-the-mill hatchbacks. So the Toyota Prius was launched here in the UK in October 2000. Originally, consumers weren't really convinced. People had issues regarding the technology, and I guess it's the way things are with car technology these days. People are slightly reticent, they're slightly hesitant to adapt to new technologies without any warranties, without any firm, concrete things in writing saying this will be okay and everything else will be fine. And the main concerns were regarding the battery longevity and any reliability issues just regarding the complexity of the hybrid technology. And to overcome that, Toyota decided to introduce a 5-year mechanical warranty, and in fact it was Europe's first 5-year mechanical warranty, so that really tried to put the money where their mouth is, and they thought, we're going to do it, we're going to push for this. In addition to this, a private leasing scheme called Prius One was introduced to protect buyers from any residual value risk, and Toyota committed itself to handling recycling at the end of the car's useful life, because again it can be quite a difficult procedure to recycle a car which has a lot of batteries, lithium-ion batteries. And Toyota already had the cleanest car manufacturing process in the world at that time. They really set a pathway to help people purchase, not only the purchase of the vehicle, maintenance of the vehicle, but also the end-of-life aspect. And from that, they flew off the shelf. They sold a load of Priuses, the first generation, and it became the world's most successful hybrid vehicle. And it proved that family cars don't need to be powered by petrol or diesel alone. Now, the second generation Prius came out in about 2003, 2004. At this point, Ford had the Ford Focus. Vauxhall were producing the Astra, and the upcoming Astra was about to come out as well, and they were a lot more upmarket. And Prius, well, Toyota realised that Prius needs to be slightly more upmarket, but also needs to look slightly differently. So they made it look a bit more snazzy, a bit more up-to-date, which actually customers found quite nice. It was quite well received, but the price was very important, and they set the price at extremely compelling. It was just extremely compelling, and it just made people go for it, because ultimately Toyota actually lost money on each one they made, but that really helped gain a lot of customers. So for me, if they gain a lot of customers, that's probably worth it for them in the long run, and it was. It was a risky strategy, but it worked. Now, the second generation car was bigger than the outgoing car. It was somewhere sized between a Corolla and a Camry, and the new Toyota Prius at the time introduced second generation, the hybrid drivetrain, known as the hybrid synergy drive, HSD. The purpose of the system was to redress the balance between the petrol and electric motors, instead of relying on the petrol engine to produce peak performance with the electric motor as an ancillary. This new system increased the range and usage of the electric motor to focus on stronger performance. So they upgraded different components to produce more torque from 0 to 1200 RPM, so lower down the rev range there was more presence of that electric power, and therefore they could pack fewer cells, and therefore it reduced the weight of the vehicle, but still you'd have the same sort of power, the same sort of output as you would have before. And then they introduced other technologies such as a new stop-start system to improve urban emissions, an EV driving mode specifically for low miles, so up to sort of 10, 20, 30 miles an hour it was electric only, and now the MPG had increased to on average 65.7. Now, as to whether you get that MPG figure, it really was dependent on your driving style, but at the end of the day it was an advancement. And with much greater demands placed on the electrical side of the drivetrain due to the way that the new system implemented electric power, Toyota recognised the importance of making similar improvements in the backward flow of charge to the battery. So it devised a regen system that captured the kinetic energy that's normally wasted through processes such as braking, so the heat from that was regenerated and put back into the electric motor, and that basically fed electrical energy back into the battery. So for the end of 2004, the second gen Prius had already surpassed the total sales of its first gen, so at this point it's doing extremely well. Now, the third gen came out in about 2009, and again advancements were made. CO2 emissions dropped as low as 89 grams per kilometre, which was unheard of. Combined fuel economy of 72.4 miles per gallon. Again, it was always an increase. Toyota just made sure these incremental increases, that they didn't push it to a point where they knew they wouldn't be able to advance on it, but they had like a 10-20% increase in every area. And they introduced a larger 1.8 litre petrol engine with the hybrid synergy drive system, and this was significantly smaller and lighter before, hence why the displacement had gone up from 1.5 to 1.8. Now, you might say, well, okay, this is all good and well. Toyota managed to produce a nice car, they managed to produce something that people wanted to drive, but how did it become the statement that it did? I mean, it's become almost a meme, if you want to call it that. And I guess it really stemmed from several points. To begin with, the oil crisis, oil for prices, that really pushed people to look toward hybrid system. Then there were the likes of South Park, and in media people would take the mick, they would josh around, they would just out Prius drivers, and the whole motto of any publicity is good publicity. I guess that really rang true, because even though they took they joked about Prius drivers, etc., it alerted probably a lot of people to something they weren't aware of. And I think on top of that, you then had taxi drivers use Priuses. If you hear Uber, what car do you associate with Uber? As soon as you hear Prius, it's almost synonymous with Uber. And I don't blame them, because the way Toyota build their cars historically is all about durability. It's always about durability. Once they put a lot of money into research and development initially, and then they hardly change it. Why? Because they test their cars thoroughly. Their tolerances are extremely fine, finer than any other German car manufacturer out. Japanese car manufacturer tolerances are extremely fine. And if they're allowed to build a car within their remit, within their set parameters, and there's no external influence, they will make the best quality car. It might not be the most snazzy car, they might not have the best design language, but in terms of the basics, the switches, if they will put a lot of money into producing a switch for, let's say, the window, yet you will see that in 10, 20, 30 years time, that window switch will still work. That plastic or whatever material they use will not fade away. It will work, nothing will go wrong with it. And they will use that same switch throughout the years, whether 2nd gen, 3rd gen, 4th gen. Why? Because it works. If it works, why change it? Just keep it. And that is the motto, that's the way they do things. And the durability is why Toyota was so successful with the Prius. And on top of that, you have to think about the Prius. It's built like a tank, and engineers of Toyota created a product that had to withstand real-world abuse that it received from the end user, because it was designed to do several things. It had a decent-sized boot, it had 5 doors, it was stopping and starting all the time, hence why taxis used it. And the proof's in the pudding. You can find many Priuses 250, 300,000 miles, and they're fine. And the resale value is actually pretty good, because if you look at an 06 or 07 Toyota Prius with 200, 300,000 miles, you'll get a lot more for your money, as in, if you're selling one, you'll get more than you would if you would sell equivalent age Vauxhall Astra or Ford Focus. Why? Because the Ford Focus or Vauxhall Astra 2006, 2007 with 250,000 miles, probably towards the end of its life. Whereas with the Toyota, you could probably put another 50 to 100,000 miles on it quite easily. So that's not an issue. And in terms of maintenance costs, the spark plugs, the coolant, the transmission or oil brakes, they're all designed to have an extended life. Toyota specifically made sure all those components had an extended life, which means less overall cost to the consumer. Everything about the Toyota Prius was incredibly well thought out, and what helped the Prius grow further was the introduction of tax relief. There were incentives in place. In London, you didn't need to pay congestion charge. Other areas of the world, road tax was zero. The government would help. They would say to you, here's a few £1,000, here's a few $1,000, whatever, to help you buy a hybrid vehicle. In LA, you had the carpool lane. What was allowed in the carpool lane or special lanes? Priuses. And there's a running joke of, oh, the fastest drivers in LA are Prius drivers. Yeah, that's because they can use the other lanes. They have benefits. It's cheaper to run them. They're easier to park. They're easier to use. They're readily available. Parts are readily available because they are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. And Toyota is really a brand you can trust. I know that's a hard thing to say with brands, but they know how to make a car, put it that way. It's like someone says to me, I want to buy a sports car. I don't really have a budget as such. I would automatically say to them, Porsche, because Porsche know how to make a sports car. In the same way, if someone said to me, I'm not really that interested in cars, but I want a car that's durable and will last me a long time and won't cause me any issues in the long run, I would say to them, buy a Toyota, but basically buy Japanese. That is what I would say. Don't go for all these cheap German used cars, because they'll bring you, unless you've got $2,000 or $3,000 set aside for repairs and stuff, don't do it. Stick with Japanese cars, you'll be fine. And again, I've asked my local mechanic, I've asked friends who are mechanics, etc., and they all say the same thing as well. So that's really the history of the Toyota Prius. I mean, we're now to the 4th generation, and the looks are slightly striking. It's a bit different. A lot of original Prius drivers, customers, are a bit put off by the new design language. They think it's a bit in your face, especially the rear end. But Uber drivers continue to use them. Fleet cars, they're used regularly. It's a common car, it's used, and it's done very, very well for Toyota. As for the future of the Prius, well, it could be all electric, who knows? There is a huge push towards all electric vehicles, but I think for the last 20 years it really has set the standard, and you look at the likes of all the manufacturers now. There's BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Mitsubishi, whatever car manufacturer you look at, they all have a hybrid variant of their vehicle. Whereas a 3 Series, a 5 Series, C Class, it doesn't matter what car it is, there's almost always a hybrid alternative available. And how did that come about? Well, it's from Toyota. Toyota put the initial research development in, that initial work in, to popularise it, to make a mass-produced hybrid car, and everyone followed suit. And that is why, I guess, Toyota were, up until recently, one of the biggest car manufacturers in the world. They were one of the most valued car manufacturers in the world. So let me know what you think of the video and what you want to see next. Yeah, and I'll see you next time.